Hey everybody, my name is Mike Verkest and I am coming to you from the beautiful Pacific Northwest. I want to get you out of Texas. All those people you've been listening to, they're all in Texas right now, but look at the green, look how beautiful it is here. And I would like to welcome you to Oregon. So again, my name is Mike Verkest and I serve as the Vice President of Social Media and Marketing for FlightBridge Ed. We are a critical care company that travels the world in helping people up their game for EMS education. All right, so we're here to talk about podcasts. And let me tell you, most people don't know this, but FlightBridge Ed wouldn't even exist as you know it today without the podcast. It actually started as a podcast back in 2012, so long ago. Now, between the Second Shift, EMS Lighthouse Project, and FlightBridge Ed, we get nearly 1 million downloads a year, which is pretty incredible because let me tell you, it didn't start like that. Having a successful podcast takes patience, dedication, time, a little bit of money, a little bit of know-how, and hopefully over the next 10 minutes or so, I'll be able to give you some tips and tricks to help you get your podcast on the airwaves. Okay, so question one, or really tip number one, is really for you. It's a question that I've got for you. And I'm gonna quote my favorite speaker, Simon Sinek. And he really wants to know about your why. Why do you want to start a podcast? What is it that excites you about wanting to do a podcast? Because I tell you, if you just think it's because you want to make money, well, that's not going to happen, right? Now, if you're talking about money, you're going to spend some of your own money, but that's not a real good motivation to get your podcast started. So what is your why? I don't have an answer for you on that. I just don't. But I want you to think about it because until you figure that out, don't hit the record button. You need to figure out why you want to do this podcast. You've heard the others talk about what an advantage having a podcast is, right? So taking the education to them. That's where tip number 2 comes in. Who is them? Who is your audience? Who is it you want to make this podcast for? Is it for your own local rescue squad? Is it a group of 4 or 5 men and women? Perfect, that's great. Or are you trying to take over the world with your podcast? Either way, you need to figure out who your audience is because in the end, everyone has specific care and feeding. Are you doing this for EMRs, EMTs, paramedics, nurses, medical directors? Who is going to be watching? They all have their own separate care and feeding plan that you need to be aware of by the time you're ready to hit that record button. Tip number 3, consistency. When I started recording the Second Shift back in 2015, to call our publishing schedule loosey-goosey is being very generous. We wouldn't record for a month, then we would record for 2 months, 3 months, and then we'd do 10 of them, and it was just really weird. And one thing that one of my good friends, Eric Bauer, told me, consistency. Whatever it is you want to do, you need to commit to it, right? So let's say it's just once a month, fine, but you need to make sure you do it once a month. If you want to be super aggressive, and I wouldn't recommend doing this, and say once a week, then you need to commit to it. And you need to have podcasts that are ready to go. I would say before you even release your first episode, you have 10 to 15 episodes ready to go. That way you'll have a little bit of a buffer when it comes to recording because I guarantee you doing it once a week or once, even every 2 weeks, it is super hard if you think of the content creation that you need to do, all the different parts of editing and everything that has to do with a podcast. It's going to be super tough. So, but be consistent. That's the bottom line. If you're going to do it once a week, just do it. Twice a week, fine. Once a year, whatever it is, but stick to it. All right, tip number 4, platforms. When you have your show ready to go, you really need to have some diversity in the ways you offer your listeners your show. Maybe you just want to start off on SoundCloud. Perfect. But that may not be perfect for all of your listeners. So what are some better options out there? Well, there's a million, of course. I already mentioned one of them, iTunes. iTunes, podcast, great. Apple Podcasts, there's nothing that you can go wrong with that. About, I don't know, what, 50% of podcasts about, and I'm sort of making that up on me. Don't hold me to that, Dr. Jarvis, are listened to on Apple Podcasts, right? But there's a lot of others. Spotify, that's the big one. That's really the #1 place for podcasts nowadays, Spotify. But there are tons of apps, right? Podbean, Stitcher, you can find TuneIn Radio, iHeartRadio. There are just literally thousands of apps out there that you can publish your podcast to. And the good news is all they need is your RSS feed. There's nothing hard about it. It's super easy. But really, what we want to do is get your podcast out into the universe. And using these apps is going to be the best way you can do that. All right, tip number 5, social media. Now, depending on what it is you want to do with your podcast, again, if this is just for your little agency or your big agency, you don't necessarily need to worry about social media. But if you want to share it with the rest of the world, and whether you like it or not, the world really does revolve around social media nowadays, especially for putting podcast or just creative content, whatever it may be, out for the masses. Now, whether it's a Facebook page or you just plug it on your own personal Facebook page, whatever it may be. In fact, I'll just take a minute here to plug the EMS podcast page that I co-manage with Ginger Locke. So go check that one out. But you really have to dip your toe into the world of social media. And again, you may or may not be super crazy about that. So I'll just be the first to tell you, Twitter is a great place to go and test the waters for social media. You can check out a bajillion hashtags that have to do with EMS. You can check out FOMED, so free open access medical education. P.S. That's what you're doing with a podcast, right? Free open access medical education. Again, whether it's just for your agency, for your county, or for whoever, for everybody. That's what you're participating in, is free open access medical education. So again, Twitter's a great way. You can create an account. You can just sort of peek around. You don't necessarily have to engage with people, but it really gives you a great time to be able to feel what's going on out there in the world and really potentially hit your target audience, which is going to be obviously EMS providers. Okay, here's the other piece to it. It's called social media for a reason. Don't make a page and let it rot. You need to actually get in there, engage, and talk with and learn about the people that want to learn about your podcast. So don't just create a page and let it just sit there and die. You need to get in there. You need to share your page. You need to get it out there so people can find you. So share it. Ask your friends to share it. Ask your family to share it. Ask your coworkers to share it. Whatever it may be, they want to see your smiling face, or maybe at least hear your smiling voice. That's a thing, by the way. If those guys didn't talk about it, they know when you're smiling when you're recording. A couple other things. Snapchat, TikTok, don't waste your time with those. That's not going to be where your people are at. It might be where they're at, but you're not going to be able to advertise or get people to see your podcast very much, 2 seconds at a time. So I would stick with the big ones. Facebook, Twitter, Instagram is great as well. They have Igtv now, so you could turn your podcast into a video and then get that released as well. So there's lots of options out there, but you don't have a choice. You got to get on social media and let people know what's going on with your podcast. All right, tip number 6, get your name out there. Right? Of course, share your content on your own social media. If you've got friends, family, whatever, have them hook you up, right? Share the stuff on their pages. Get your word out there. Are you speaking at a conference soon? Are you going to be on somebody else's podcast? Of course, don't forget, these are great opportunities to get your name, your show, your title, all that stuff out there for other people to hear about. Let them get excited about what you have to offer. Okay, so if you're on somebody else's podcast, be tactful about it. Ask them if it's cool if you plug your show. Most of the time it's going to be just fine, but that is a great opportunity for you to get your name out there, the name of your show, and what's going on. Okay, between you and me, this is a little bonus section. I know Dr. Jarvis already talked about it, but I cannot overemphasize the importance of quality sound, quality editing, quality everything, right? There is nothing that will get me to turn off a podcast faster if the audio is terrible. So I don't need you to have a recording studio in your house, not at all. But you need to come correct with the good sounding microphone. Use headphones, use a good recorder, go into a quiet place, use some kind of sound dampening if you can. I just have to reiterate it. It is going to be, because you can have 1 million followers. Well, maybe you wouldn't have 1 million, maybe you do. But I guarantee you, you won't have them for long if your audio is not very good. So, and let me tell you, from my perspective, where I edit other people's stuff from Firedog Productions, that's what I do, I can tell you that audio quality is super important. So make sure you invest in some good recording equipment. All right, hey guys, it's been great to get to spend a little bit of time with you. I appreciate you joining me in the great outdoors here in the beautiful Willamette Valley in Oregon, but I want to leave you with a couple of things. The first one is really have some realistic goals about your podcast. So what do I mean that? I don't want you to feel so much pressure that when you publish your first one and you get 12 whole downloads and 6 of them are your friends and family, I don't want you to be discouraged by that. You know, the podcasts that I'm fortunate enough to be able to do with Eric Bauer, Dr. Jarvis, Dr. Sani, you know, we get about 1 million downloads a year, and that is a lot. But yours probably isn't going to have that. And I don't say that from a place of being egotistical. That has taken 10 years for us to be able to do that, right? And a lot of dedication and a lot of heartbreak and a lot of everything else and technical problems and frustration. Believe me, I wanted to quit more often than not. So it's okay, right? Again, if you're just doing this podcast for your agency, for your county, maybe for your state, maybe for an EMS conference, whatever it is, just do your best. Remember, at the end of the day, as educators, we are trying to get the material, whatever the material may be. Maybe it's a protocol review, maybe it's an update to something that's happened. We are trying to give them another medium in which to get the information. So some people that are maybe good auditory learners, maybe the podcast is going to be just the thing for them. But no matter what it is, at the end of the day, it's just something else to augment what we're already doing. And I think it's an important piece of that. Okay, well, that's our time today, guys. I appreciate you joining in. I'm going to actually head back to my office now where we're going to be able to do some live Q&A when it comes to podcasts. Again, Mike Verkest, been great joining you. We'll talk to you soon.